He had no shadow. I didn't notice at first. Who looks at people's shadows, right? But that night, when Prince Osei walked into our village, it was clear as day. The moon was full, casting shadows of every tree, every hut, even the chickens. But not him. My name is Kwame. I was only 15 then. I grew up in a small village nestled in the heart of Ghana, surrounded by thick forests and the songs of birds. Life was simple, predictable even. We had our traditions, our gods, and our ways, and the royal family was always a distant power, ruling from their palace, far away from our humble lives. We were taught to respect them, to honor their lineage. But there were whispers, too, stories told in hushed tones about the darkness that clung to them, especially to the youngest prince, Osei. The first time I heard his name, I was just a boy. My grandmother, who was a revered storyteller, had spoken of him, her voice low and trembling. He was born under the blood moon, she had said, and the gods themselves turned away. I didn't understand then, but those words stayed with me, lingering like a shadow. Years passed, and the stories of Prince Osei faded into the background, eclipsed by the concerns of daily life. But then, one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, a messenger arrived. The prince was coming to our village. The elders were excited. A royal visit was a rare honor. They hurried to prepare a feast, slaughtering the fattest goat and brewing the strongest palm wine. That evening, as the villagers gathered, I noticed the change in the air. The usual warmth of our village seemed to drain away, replaced by a cold, unnatural stillness. Even the insects, which usually buzzed and chirped in the night, were silent. The sky was clear, the moon full and bright, casting long shadows over everything. But when Prince Osei arrived, I saw it. He had no shadow. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. I looked again, harder this time. The prince walked tall, his robe trailing behind him, but there was no shadow beneath him. The realization hit me like a cold slap to the face. My heart started to pound, my mouth dry. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't find the words. The prince was striking, almost otherworldly. His skin was darker than the night, smooth like polished onyx, and his eyes, oh, his eyes, glowed faintly, reflecting the moonlight like a predator's in the dark. He smiled as he walked among us, but there was something wrong about that smile. It never reached his eyes, and it made my skin crawl. The elders greeted him with deep bows, showering him with praises and gifts. They led him to the center of the village, where a fire had been lit, the flames dancing and casting flickering light across the gathering. As the prince sat, I couldn't take my eyes off him. He was too still, too calm, like a snake coiled and waiting to strike. We all sat around the fire. The drums began to beat, and the feast was served. My mother, who always sat beside me during such gatherings, nudged me to eat, but I couldn't. I just stared at the prince. He ate little, drank even less, but his eyes, those glowing eyes, never stopped moving, scanning the crowd, searching for something or someone. And every time they landed on me, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The night dragged on, the drumming growing louder, faster. The villagers were trying to drown out the unease that had settled over us, but it was no use. I could see it in their faces, the forced smiles, the nervous glances. No one dared to speak their fear, but it hung in the air, thick and suffocating. When the dancing started, I joined in, hoping to shake off the feeling of dread. But something was wrong. The rhythm was off. The steps felt awkward, forced. I stumbled, nearly falling, and stepped back to catch my breath. That's when I saw it again. Prince Osei, dancing. But his feet weren't touching the ground. He was hovering, just a few inches above the earth, moving with an unnatural grace. And still, no shadow. I wanted to scream, to shout for someone to look, to see what I was seeing. But I was paralyzed by fear, my voice trapped in my throat. I watched in horror as the prince's smile grew wider, more menacing. His eyes locked onto mine, and in that moment, I felt like he could see right through me, into my very soul. Then, suddenly, the drums stopped. The silence was deafening, broken only by a terrible, raspy coughing. I turned to see old Nana Afia, the village's oldest elder, clutching her chest. She tried to stand, but her legs gave way, and she collapsed to the ground. The villagers rushed to her side, but it was too late. She was dead. Panic spread through the crowd, but no one dared to look at the prince. No one but me. He was still smiling, his eyes still glowing, as if he had expected this. I felt a cold sweat on my back. It wasn't just Nana Afia. I knew, deep in my bones, that something much worse was coming. The prince stood slowly, as if he had all the time in the world. He didn't say a word, just turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness as silently as he had come. The villagers were left in shock, staring at Nana Afia's lifeless body. Some whispered prayers, others began to wail, but I couldn't move. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the spot where the prince had stood. The night dragged on, and slowly, people began to leave, returning to their homes, whispering among themselves. My mother pulled me to my feet, her face pale and drawn. "Come, Kwame," she said, her voice trembling. "We must go." But sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay on my mat, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the evening over and over in my mind. I could still see the prince's glowing eyes, his hovering feet, his shadowless form. I could still feel his gaze, cold and penetrating. Days passed, and the village tried to return to normal, but it was as if a dark cloud had settled over us. People started to fall ill, one by one. It started with the elders, those who had sat closest to the prince that night. They complained of a strange coldness, a deep ache in their bones that no medicine could cure. Then, the younger ones began to get sick too. My friends, my neighbors, even my mother. She grew weaker each day, her vibrant spirit fading as the sickness took hold. I tried to care for her, but nothing I did helped. The village healer was powerless, his herbs and prayers doing nothing to stop the relentless march of the illness. I watched helplessly as she withered away, her eyes hollow, her skin pale and clammy. And all the while, I knew who was responsible. Prince Osei, the shadowless prince, the one who brought death with him. The village was dying, and no one knew what to do. The elders were gone, the young ones were too sick to work, and the once lively village had become a place of mourning and fear. The animals grew restless, the crops withered in the fields. Even the trees seemed to droop, their leaves turning brown long before the dry season. I couldn't stay any longer, not with the memories of that night haunting me, not with the sight of my mother's frail body lying on her mat, gasping for breath. I had to leave, to get away from the cursed place that had once been my home. On the night my mother died, I packed what little I had and left. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. There was no one left to say goodbye to. I walked through the dark forest, the moon hidden behind thick clouds, my heart heavy with grief and fear. I traveled for days, avoiding other villages, not wanting to bring the curse with me. I wandered through the wilderness, living off the land, haunted by nightmares of glowing eyes and shadowless figures. I could feel the prince's presence, even in the deepest parts of the forest, like he was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. Eventually, I found a new village, far away from my old life. They took me in, a young boy with no family, no home. I didn't tell them about Prince Osei, about the sickness, about the curse. I kept those memories buried deep, hoping that the prince would never find me. But even now, years later, I can't escape the feeling that he's still out there, searching for me. I still see him in my dreams, his glowing eyes, his floating feet, his terrible, empty smile. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I feel a cold breeze brush past me, and I know he's close. I live in fear of the day he'll come for me, of the day I'll see him again, standing in the moonlight, shadowless. And when that day comes, I wonder if I'll still have a shadow of my own